Thank you for joining us today. This is Alan Brockstein, and I wanted to just share a quick disclaimer before we get started. None of the content within this webinar should be construed as investment advice. New Cannabis Ventures is not an intermediary, broker-dealer, investment advisor, or exchange, and does not provide investment advice or investment advisory services. No securities are being offered in this webinar, and we have no access to non-public information. This webinar is not a place for giving or receiving financial advice, advice concerning investment decisions, tax, or legal advice. Please note as well that RavenQuest is a client of New Cannabis Ventures. We host a dedicated page on our site that helps visitors learn more about the company, the fact-based, data-driven investor dashboard. Investor dashboards quickly tell the official story and financial status about the company. You can visit the RavenQuest dashboard to get the most updated financial information and news on the company. Okay. At New Cannabis Ventures, our primary goal is to help our readers learn about and connect with leading cannabis companies in the industry. We are pleased to be able to go beyond our normal content with this live webinar format, which is going to allow our audience to get to hear directly from the CEO of RavenQuest, George Robinson. George may not yet be well known to the broader investment community, but this is rapidly changing. I was listening to Stonecastle's Bruce Campbell on the Cannabis Growth Opportunity Corp webinar last week, and was pleasantly surprised to hear him highlight the company on it as one of his top 10 holdings. He too echoed what I've heard from many in the industry and what I've learned from speaking with George over the last several months. Few in Canada are as plugged into the industry as George Robinson. Before launching RavenQuest, which went public in the fall, he helped one of the largest LPs get its license, and there's a lot more to the story beyond that. Until recently, RavenQuest was very quiet after it began trading in the fall. While pursuing a cannabis production strategy as well, the primary focus of the company has been to create value through its relationships and its technology, as George will surely discuss. The company accelerated its ACMPR status timeline by purchasing LP Blumera earlier this month. With the closing of the $26 million capital raise and the acquisition of Blumera, this is a great time to listen to George tell a story. Before we get going, I want to thank Matthew McDonald, who heads investor relations at RavenQuest, for his help as well. Now, we'll be getting into the presentation right away. George will be walking us through his investor deck, and then we'll take some questions. At any time during the presentation, you can type a question. There are many attendees today, so there's a good chance we won't get to all the questions, but we'll give it our best shot. So now, please welcome RavenQuest CEO George Robinson, who will talk to us about the company and answer your questions. Welcome, George.
Thank you, Alan, very, very much. Awesome introduction. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day to attend and listen to our story today. I think you're going to learn a whole bunch more if you haven't heard a lot about us. And we'll make that message very clear to you, and we really look forward to the questions. It's probably one of the funnest things I get to do is to interact with people who have a genuine interest in RavenQuest and cannabis. How about we move on to our third slide, and we'll start talking a little bit about what the market opportunity is. Up here in Canada, we're taking a look at a lot of the opportunity based on not our own numbers, but numbers that we've taken off of reports from Stats Canada. We've taken a look at numbers coming out of some of the other analysts that are following the market. But realistically, we have about a $7.8 billion market that's coming at us. Now, just recently, we've heard Stats Can say as of last year, the black market actually was in at about $5.6 billion. So maybe this number is a little on the shy side, but anyhow, the market opportunity is massive. And within the country, we also see within that 7.8, about a $1.8 billion medical market. We're going to talk a little bit more about the medical market also, but obviously talk about the recreational side. Next slide, please. So really what we see right now, the government of Canada has been looking for and believes to start off our legalization in Canada for adult use cannabis, we're going to need about 1 million kilograms. If we take a look at the 89 or so licensed producers that are out there, and we take a look at their real, not forecasted or funded capacity, what's really in production right now is approximately about 300,000 kilograms. That may be moving up just slightly as more facilities come up, but you can see that we have a tremendous big shortfall in supply versus what the demand is looking like right across Canada. We already have provinces trying to bring into play their position by buying up through supply agreements a bunch of that cannabis to make sure that each one of those provinces has enough to meet its provincial demand that they see coming at them very quickly. So the shortfalls there in the near term, as we see the build out of the sites that are proposed, we'll see this number actually grow to about 5 or 6 million kilograms as we look forward beyond 2018. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about the medical market as we see it right now. You can see that the patient acquisition strategy or the use strategy that's going on here has been growing tremendously. The new numbers that we're seeing right now is well over 230,000 medicinal patients up here in Canada. But I actually bring this slide out not to really talk about that, but talk about what's going to happen so you as an investor can take a look at what's probably going to happen as soon as legalization and the adult use market comes into play. We're going to see some of these patients come off and go and take a choice to actually go and buy from a retail outlet. But what's really coming behind this is with the insurance providers up here in Canada starting to back and put into their programs and benefits medicinal cannabis, we see this number in registered patients climbing to about 3.4 million over the next 3 or 4 years, which is going to make just the medicinal market for cannabis absolutely huge. So what you'll see initially, we're going to see this drop off at legalization. We'll start to see someone like myself, who's a baby boomer, probably taking a look at medicinal cannabis for many reasons. But the insurance companies are telling me, when I've chatted with them really quite clearly, that cannabis becomes a less expensive way of dealing with many symptom relief type of applications where opioids or other type of narcotics are in play. So we see this number, in short, growing to about 3.4 million over the next 3 to 5 years. Next slide, please. But realistically, what we're looking at is RavenQuest. We see that the numbers for the base market, which is the use of cannabis, in that $7.8 billion range. We as a company have decided to take a look at the larger portion of the ancillary market and the other upsides of the markets that are there. So rather than just as a company focusing on that $7.8, $8.7 billion number that sits in front of you, we've taken a position to take the analogy from mining. Lots of people made money on picks and shovels rather than gold. Well, not only are we going to be a cannabis producer and touch into that $8.7 billion business, we're also going to be in the picks and shovel business by supplying services, by supplying product, such as gardens and dryers, supplying ongoing management services and operational services, so that our opportunity is greater than the $7.8 billion, and it stretches into that $22.6 billion market that we see in front of us. Awesome. Let's go to the next slide. I don't really like talking about myself, but my board and my team says you better talk a little bit about yourself. I've been around the cannabis space since 2013, where I was asked to come in and work with a very early licensed producer applicant at the time that had built their facility to assist them in getting them over the finish line to get their license to cultivate. My background for the last 20 years has been almost single-handedly focused into the what we call, let's say, the regulated industry, like oil and gas, like banking but never a branch, healthcare but never a hospital. Industries where it takes a lot of regulation knowledge, understanding what an output document really is that the regulator will put out, and how to interpret that into a facility to make the facility function correctly. Within our company, we call it form, function, and flow. If the form of the building is proper, it will assist in the function, and then ultimately how people flow through the building to keep it in compliance. I have had a vast amount of experience working with Health Canada over the last 5 years. Luckily, I've helped 11 licensed producers get their license to cultivate, or their full license up to sell and dispense, as we call it up here in Canada. So we have gained as a company a tremendous amount of knowledge about how Health Canada sees the market, how to be in that regulated space, and how to be successful in that space. With that, I've been able to actually take a look at tweaking the designs of buildings that are essentially put into place and finding ways that are actually helping not only my clients and ultimately myself with my own facilities, but helping the regulator come up with ways to make sure that the facility, the operations maintain compliance without observation or citation. It's also helped me understand where there's weaknesses in the current designs of buildings, in the current processing of cannabis. I've seen those things through their audits and their inspections, and I've been able to redesign around that, provide that to my clients and provide it to ourselves to make sure that we are making sure that we are always compliant in everything that we do every day while we're in the industry. Awesome, I'll take the next slide, please. The way that we've set up our company has two distinct divisions in it. At the top, the parent is RavenQuest BioMed Inc. Off to the left, as you see there, you see the consultant and management services division. This realistically is taking my 4 companies that I had with my team and having them move into RavenQuest Technologies Canada Inc. through a material change that we did in the business. But we brought over all of those clients. We brought over all of the manufacturing representative agreements. We bought all of those late stage applicants, came with us from our previous company, the CL2G Group, over into the consulting, management and services division. What that actual division offers is everything from starting with an ACMPR client, in the future the Cannabis Act client, starting off with a blank piece of paper with them and assisting them to getting right from the very beginning, what does that building got to look like from the form, function, and flow. We assist them in building their applications that would be submitted to Health Canada. We support them through that whole process of the interaction of questions and clarifications going back and forth. Further, after that, once the building starts, we are very lucky that we have teamed up with architects and engineers. We've teamed up with people who do geotechnical work. We've teamed up and we have the opportunity to supply our customers with access to law firms that specialize in the cannabis field. And we also provide them with access to insurance, that if they start with it at the construction side, that insurance company and offering follows them right through to the point of having liability and recall insurance. So really, I don't like the word turnkey solutions, but I guess it might be the best thing that I can say is that we provide all of that. And within that whole offering, we supply growing technologies if the client so chooses, drying technologies, the security solution, which is extremely important. We help them off with the installation of the patients and genetic management systems. And then post that, we have remote support services that allows us to from our facility in Burnaby, British Columbia, Canada, we can actually remote into their facilities and support them online and thus help them reduce costs of having expensive technology people working every single day in their facilities. And that's a service that we call remote support services. We do that through a very sophisticated type of VPN tunnels that we put in place through network security appliances so that our customers know and our clients know that it's a secure connection when we reach in and help them out at their facility. On the other side, you can see RQB Capital Corp, which is our investment and acquisitions division. Our most recent investment was Blumera. It was a 20,000 square foot facility in Markham, Ontario, well positioned out in Eastern Canada. And arguably, we're going to see that Ontario is our biggest cannabis market that we have in all of Canada, as far as the purchasing power that will be in place. So really well positioned in Markham, about 30 minutes north of the downtown core of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So really nicely positioned there. Our first investment goes back to the end of September of last year when we acquired 100% of the shares of Alberta Green Biotech. That's going to be a 35,500 square foot facility that currently today is under construction. And that facility will be ready for its license to cultivate what we call a confirmation of readiness review and submission right around July of this year. Lumera, when we completely move that facility into our orbital gardening strategy, which we'll talk about in a minute, where we can do about 4,000 kilograms per year. AGB at 35,500 will produce about 7,000 kilograms or more per year. What we're really actually doing here now, when you take a look at it, you can add these two facilities up and roughly around the 55,000 square feet. The question that I always ask my clients is, what is the yield you want out of your square footage versus just how many square feet are you going to go and promote? One of the things that we think that we do very well is we get very high yield production per square foot. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I'd really like you to understand that when you're looking at other investment opportunities or you're taking a look at other companies, get in your mind to ask the question, not how many square feet do you have, but what is your yield in kilograms per year on that square footage? We have an opportunity now when we take a look at our clients that are coming from the Consulting Management Services division. They are what we call deal flow. We can take a look at them. We've been working with them since, most of them, since 59 clients in that space totally right now. We can look at it as deal flow, as since we've been helping them since day one in that blank piece of paper, it's an opportunity for us to actually make an investment into them or acquire them. So we have a natural deal flow coming from the Consulting and Management Services side right over to the Investment and Acquisitions division. So it becomes a very interesting way of taking a look at where we want to expand strategically and where we want to grow strategically, but also knowing those people and how committed they are to doing everything within the regulatory environment. We find the right people. And then lastly, on the Investment and Acquisitions division, we are completely tied into the Indigenous people. And those are real important things that we're going to talk about what's happening up here in Canada with Indigenous people and the cannabis space. This slide will sort of give you a little bit more detail to look through where we have some of the investments and what we're up to. But overall, with our orbitally gardening strategy, we'll have 11,000 kilograms per annum coming out by about the end of the year this year. Next slide, please. Let's talk about some of the stuff that we're doing that's rather unique. First and foremost, orbital gardening or rotational gardening has been around for nearly 40 years. So this is nothing new. Cannabis in this space has also been in rotational gardens for at least 15 plus years. So that's not new. Really what's coming very interesting when we're taking a look at the orbital gardening strategies is we've taken this and we've added a whole bunch of proprietary development in the control systems. We've developed the garden to be more specific to what we're taking a look at relative to gardening strategies. But you can see from that middle slide that we are going to stack our gardens at minimum 2 wide and 3 high for a cluster of 6. To put this in perspective, the garden is about 8 feet deep, roughly speaking. Each one of the gardens, so the width of the two wide is about 8 feet. So that's about 64 square feet. In that 64 square feet, when we run on the 6 cycles per year of growing cycles per year, this garden cluster will produce 1,500 grams per square foot. When you take a look at other growing strategies that are out there, and some people are getting some very, very good numbers, but even the best number out there per square foot is getting up into 300 to 400. But the industry average today in flat table design gardens is about 130 grams per square foot. This is a game changer. Why? We're using the cubic footage of the room rather than the square footage of the room. So we're allowing ourselves to use that height of the room and allow the garden itself and the cannabis to rotate around the center light. As you take a look at the 2 slides on the outside, the actual physical garden will constantly be rotating around that light source for its 8-week growth cycle. That includes the veg cycle and the flowering cycle, a total of 8 weeks. When that actually happens and the plants are always moving, we get a couple of very interesting things that start to happen. Going back to old ancient ways of how people used to work in their gardens, they used to walk through and they used to tap the gardens with a stick or something. One is to knock off flies and other stuff, but 2 was to stress the plant structure. how I make this analogy to humans, when you go and you work out and you're doing your weights, you kind of tear your muscles a little bit and that muscle gets bigger. The same thing is happening in the plant. As the plant is rotating constantly for 8 weeks, it's shaking a little bit, and that shaking causes the cellular structure of the plant to just tear a little bit. So what happens, we have a 14 to 16 inch plant that has a stalk that's about 1 inch in diameter. Okay, so what does that all mean, George? What does that really bring to the table? Well, typically when you're in a flat table environment, you get these plants that want to grow to the light. And sometimes you may have seen them in pictures out there where they have to sometimes net or trestle them because the plant grows so quickly through the early phases of veg that it's not strong enough to support itself up. In this particular case, with it always stressing, this stalk is, like I said, about 1 inch in diameter. What that allows us to do in that 14 to 16 inch plant, that stalk now becomes a super nutrient highway that can carry nutrients very quickly from the root source all the way up to the bud, which is at, as you can see here, is at the top of the plant. Some other unique things that we do in that whole strategy when we're growing in this way, we can apply only 2,400 watts of power, so 4 600-watt bulbs will supply enough light structure to the cannabis that we can get 8 pounds of yield in 8 weeks out of each garden. This is kind of remarkable because in most situations, not all, but most situations of facilities that I've been in, and I've been lucky that I can say that I've been in out of the 89 facilities up here in Canada, probably just shy of 40 that I've been into. But I can tell you that in most cases, 8,000 watts is what's required in general to get about 8 pounds. Some people do a little bit better, some people do a bit less. But for us, we use 2,400 watts, which is a very significant reduction. Why? The plants aren't very far from the light source, so we don't need all that light source. Two, what's very interesting about this is we never drip to waste or ebb and flow to waste with the water and nutrients. We actually have, if you look in the middle picture at the very bottom, I think that looks like 10, 11, and 9, you're going to see a water reservoir there. We have a full automated control system that we've designed and built that actually takes the water, takes it up to the top or to each one of the gardens. We feed the gardens twice in 24 hours. But as the water returns back to the reservoir after the feeding cycle, we actually have a process completely automated that will take a look at returning the TDS, or what our nutrient levels in the water will be. Total dissolved solids is one way to measure it. We actually have a process that will actually top up that and actually automatically return the nutrients back to its right level. Will automatically fill the reservoir back up to its required height in the reservoir, and then we pH that particular water. The process goes through this in about an hour to make sure that the reservoir is back to the perfect balance of pH, our nutrient levels, and then lastly the water level, and to make sure that that water temperature is appropriate for the root structures that we have. By automating all that, we don't waste any of it, so we don't use nearly as much water, and we don't use nearly as much nutrients because we're not wasting. What does that nearly mean? Well, let's put it into perspective. Roughly a 60,000 square foot greenhouse would use about 40,000 liters per day. Here, out of this 7,000 kilograms, we'd be very lucky at the peak that we would use 8,000 liters per day. So you can imagine with all of that, we're also reducing nutrients down to about 60% usage versus other ones who are drip to waste. So what we call Cannabis 2.0 in this area and around this garden and around this particular strategy here is that we want to be environmentally friendly. We want to have a sustainable atmosphere for growing cannabis going forward. And this has been something that's been on our team's line of sight for the last 18 months, is to make sure that when we're in the industry, we have a very good environmental plan and we have a good sustainability plan in the gardens. Next slide, please. I want to talk about our Indigenous peoples partnership that we're doing. Again, for just over 2 years, I've been taking time to go out to Ottawa and meet with the ministers that are looking at the cannabis files, also visiting with some of the senators. As that part of the business continued to increase in its need and information to understand, some of the thoughts that the Indigenous people had towards cannabis, I hired on Bill Robinson, not a relative, but a great last name. Bill Robinson is a former 34-year vet with the RCMP, and in those years as being a commanding officer and being stationed right across Canada, he has seen all the goods and bads of any types of use of drugs right across the country, and has seen the different perspectives of how communities have either been impacted or how communities have changed. So he has a really good sense from that experience of what was going on around the whole area of cannabis and other drugs in those industries. Well, he retired after 34 years. He became the CEO, and now he's the former CEO of the Alberta Gaming and Liquor Commission. I was really looking for someone to join the team who understand the frame, the lens of a regulator in a province that would be taking a look more than likely. When I thought this about 7 or 8 months ago, I wanted to find a frame of reference as someone who would understand the regulator's vision of how cannabis would be brought into a province under a retail distribution model. We hadn't at that particular time known where this was going to go. My gut told me that it was going to go through the liquor commissions or that type of agency within the provinces and territories up here in Canada. That in fact came true. So I guess I was either smart or lucky or maybe a bit of both. Having Bill's vision in the company, looking through that lens of the Alberta Gaming and Liquor Commission, we got a very good sense not only of how cannabis was going to play out in the retail side, but also how we could apply some of those same thinkings with Indigenous people, because Indigenous people had gotten into larger business opportunities, such as gaming and casino business, such as starting hotels and restaurants. And we really wanted to understand the view, and I needed a view of someone who could help us as a company navigate ourselves through that within the Indigenous peoples and the relationships, about how we could be of assistance to them and helping taking that frame and reference to the cannabis space, but back through the provincial levels. And Bill's been absolutely awesome for us. He has been out in Ottawa with me many, many times. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, he presented to the Senate Review Committee. We're looking at Bill C-45, which is the bill up here to legalize cannabis. He presented to them as one of 3 witnesses for a 2-hour session on talking about how Indigenous people view cannabis. And he was representing an organization called IPCA, the Indigenous Peoples Cannabis Association. And that went very well, great 2-hour session. Bill's working with our Indigenous people to talk about facilities for cultivation. He's also now is starting to talk to our Indigenous partners and potential new clients about the retail space that's out there. What we've done within that, we have built and designed a 24,000 square foot building, and our very first client to join us and make some very big announcement was Fort McMurray 468, and in 2017 they joined the RavenQuest team to be a partner with us and helping them navigate through the application process and in the design of their production facility that will be up in Fort McMurray, and that's in northern Alberta. Next slide, please. The Indigenous Peoples Cannabis Association is something that RavenQuest sponsors only. We have no control of this. We don't want to have any control of it. But we knew after visits to Ottawa, we had very clear information that came from the ministers that are leading the cannabis push through legalization and from the Senate. They wanted a single voice to represent Indigenous people that were favorable to cannabis, that they as a government, they as senators could reach back into, ask advice for, to see what direction the Indigenous people's views were in pushing towards the legalization of cannabis, including things like taxation, things like where they can put their facilities on their lands, how they can interact with the community in the consumption and sale of cannabis. All of these things were brought into that, and that now Indigenous Peoples Cannabis Association has been brought to well over 100 nations across Canada, and those nations are starting to sign on to the Indigenous Peoples Cannabis Association as we speak. And really nicely, the new board of directors is starting to be formulated, as I was told, and there should be announcements from IPCA, or the Indigenous Peoples Cannabis Association, soon, as it looks to do its monthly and quarterly updates to those that are represented within the association. Next slide, please. We have built a turnkey solution now for Indigenous people within our partnerships, and largely we're doing it for a reason to suggest this for them, that like a casino, like a hotel, they're looking for someone who can come in and provide a step-by-step guidance through the application process, help them design a building that can be assisted and run with them, and then hand it off to them so they can run it off in the future. Well, we've created a 24,000 square foot building that we're replicating from nation to nation to nation. Slight changes on the exterior of the building to represent the uniqueness of their culture, nation to nation. But literally the inside of the building, it has the same form, function, and flow. Why? Is now we have an opportunity to make sure there's a high level of success for our Indigenous partners by being able to help them through management services, run these facilities along with their nation's members inside the facility. But more importantly, when Health Canada sees this application process through now a group that's created within Health Canada called Navigator, not a consulting firm, but a management department within Health Canada's Office of Medicinal Cannabis. They have a program that helps Indigenous people move their application through the process and has its own group that wants to do that. Well, with the same building being presented, we are now so lucky to say that we've had one of our clients in 6.5 months from our Indigenous partner go from getting a file number to now being in final review and going through background security checks in only 6.5 months. Now, if you didn't have any reference to that, a standard application, that may be taking 18 to 24 months. So we've, with some of the work that we've done out in Ottawa, some of the work that Ottawa has done to create this Navigator group, there is a position where Ottawa believes through 3 things that came out, something called UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People, another document called the Truth and Reconciliation submission, and then thirdly, there was the Task Force on Legalization. All of them have, all of those documents and commitments the federal government has made all point to some part of this cannabis industry being given to the Indigenous people. We don't know what that number is going to be because Ottawa hasn't said yet. We don't know exactly how the application and licensing process is going to happen, but I can tell you that we've got an application through in 6.5 months, and we truly believe that the Indigenous people have an opportunity at 20% or more of this cannabis space in Canada. Next slide, please. I want to talk just a little bit more about the services division and some of the expertise in this area. We actually have a facility out in Burnaby, British Columbia. That's in right around Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. We have a complete training division in there, and a complete training room. Inside that facility in Burnaby, we have this opportunity to show them how to run security systems, how to train people to do installations and upgrades. We have people there that do project management. That's the place where we do our remote support services. Some of our consulting team sits in there, and that building actually represents the opportunity for many of our clients to come in and actually see many of the components. In fact, we have a garden in there. One of our orbital gardens are there. We don't grow cannabis in the facility, but literally we have this demonstration facility that people can come in and see exactly what they're getting from all of the different elements that would be operating in their facility. Next slide, please. One of the things that I've taken a look at, and I've asked all of my team members to do, is to never take anything that's been done the same way for the last 40 years and accept that as being the only way that you can do anything within the cannabis space. If I want to take that analogy again, if we don't push the cannabis space forward with what I call Cannabis 2.0, we'd still be doing gold the same way as we were doing it over 100 years ago. We'd still be panning for gold. Well, that kind of analogy I'm bringing towards the gardening and the drying process. If you take a look at the little, kind of looks like a stainless steel box on the left-hand part of the slide here, that's a HEPA filtered pharmaceutical grade dryer. What this dryer does is it's going to dry cannabis for us. Today, many people will either hang their cannabis for 7 to 10 days, depending on what the humidity of the room is, or they may harvest the buds off of the plants, put them on trays and run some sort of air temperature across them. What this dryer opportunity does for us and why we bring it to our clients is I wanted to change the way that we looked at this. One of the places that cannabis plant has the most potential impact for problems is once that plant's harvested, we get into an issue where we can now have potential mold and other types of pathogens get into the cannabis as it hangs and dries. Using the drying machine that we have here, we're actually taking the airflow across the bud, we're taking it to a chiller, and we're dropping out 100% of the moisture out of the air. Then we reheat the air back up to a very, very mild temperature, 16 to 18 degrees Celsius. We run the air across the cannabis at about 2.5 meters per second. With that, we can pull about 10 liters of moisture out per hour at the low end. But essentially, we can take 200 kilograms of cannabis and in 30 hours have that dried down to about 50 kilograms of cannabis in 30 hours. So we do a couple of things there. We reduce any chance of mold and other types of pathogens getting into the product itself, the flower. But more importantly, what we're doing is we can move the product much quicker to an opportunity where it can be put up for sale, lowering the time that we have inventory values held in the facility and turning it quicker into something that we can sell or move it into a derived product through some sort of processing opportunity. We love this type of technology. We're going to continue to push the industry forward by challenging what the industry is using. And these dryers aren't new. If you go over to Europe and you do any checking out over there, pharmaceutical plant structures are not being hang dried anywhere in the world anymore, or nutraceutical plant structures. They're all being put into dryers, appropriately dried in a HEPA filtered environment, and then put off for processing. Next slide, please. Some R&D work. We announced a landmark research agreement with McGill University back several months ago, and it was really important that we wanted to do this. One of my big talking points about the industry that I'm really trying to, make it maybe even more of a talking point that we do have in the United States and in Canada, is that we had about 18 months or so ago, we had a bunch of 1 ounce samples of cannabis. Something called OG Kush was sent into a lab up here in Canada to see if it was actually OG Kush. The reason that we can say that is OG Kush as a cultivar or strain has been fully DNA sequenced. So these licensed producers and others were asked to send in their OG Kush samples, and out of 12 samples, only 3 were matched to the genetics and the DNA of OG Kush. What that tells us is very quickly is we might not know as an industry. In fact, I will go over the line and say we don't know the industry by genetic sampling what exactly the cultivars that we have either growing in facilities or what people are consuming. I wanted to come up with a 3-stage process that would do cultivar recognition as the first piece for us. Starting to take a look at all the DNA snippets that are available out there in the industry, and there's well over 1,200 of them, which we have now acquired. We wanted to put in a footprint of identifying through the genetics and through the DNA sequence what actual cannabis we as a company are growing, and we knew what we are growing every single time. We also want to do some plant stabilization. Why? We're very, very keen on what people say the repeatability of the feeling or experience you have with cannabis, or from the medicinal side, what is the true things that are providing some medical benefit or symptom relief? We wanted to understand that a little bit more. And so in our plant stabilization process that we do in part 2 of our research, we start taking a look at what those secondary metabolites of that plant looks like. And we're going to start to be able to say through very controlled environments of growing the cannabis, drying the cannabis, and then taking a look at that, how can we make sure that we're getting repeatedly those secondary metabolites to come out and express themselves to make sure that either with either you are a recreational user or if you're a medicinal user, those same effects are going to happen every single time by understanding what those secondary metabolites are doing for you as an individual. Lastly, we're going to take a look at crop improvement technologies or approaches. This is what Dr. Donald Smith has been doing at McGill University for many, many decades. What he's been able to do is take a look at microbes that are naturally occurring in ground and soil, remove that microbe out, present it to plant structures, and appropriately stress them to get some sort of result that you might be looking for. That first result you could be looking for is helping with prevention of pathogens, powdery mildew, etc., some other things that could be on the plant. Or you can use that same microbe to stress the plant to get it to provide additional yield. Dr. Donald Smith and his group has been doing that for years, and in fact, they have raised somewhere north of about $50 million in royalties of isolating these microbes, put it in front of plant structures, and then getting these performance in either disease resistance or out there in yield improvement, but by never genetically modifying the plant, just putting natural stressors into place. This was really interesting because one of the things that the person that I looked up to heavily in the industry is Dr. Mark Ware, was the vice or the co-chair of the task force on legalization up here in Canada. So a strong voice in support of the cannabis, is also the director of clinical research at McGill University. And he's been studying for 22 plus years the endocannabinoid system in the human body and seeing what's happening with it with cannabinoids from the cannabis plant as remedies and reliefs, and working on ways of doing that. When he heard about what we were going to do out at the agricultural side of McDonald campus at McGill University, he was in huge support of our program, because this would help him as a researcher and a doctor get a more stable plant that he could then take to his patients and see what it would look like, growth cycle after growth cycle, application of cannabis use on the endocannabinoid system, to make sure that he could track this through and ultimately maybe get into some efficacy testing. Next slide, please. So we have a 4-pillar approach as we get a little closer to the end of this presentation. We have a turnkey solution for Indigenous people. We have an investment division that takes a look at acquisitions and investments, 11,000 kilograms per year. With our management services side of his business, we're actually supporting almost all of our costs to operate every single day. Because that management services side of our business, the consulting efforts and other, that's bringing in real cash, real revenue today, real margin today. That's paying for a large portion of our salaries, for everyone to fly around and do what we do. All the money we must pay for rents and everything, we're already cash flow positive in that manner, and we're taking care of that. Whereas other investments that you may make in other cannabis companies, they may not be in a revenue positive position. And that means that your investment dollar does not only go into the acquisition or build out of the facility, but you're also paying for those salaries. I didn't want that in my business model. I wanted to make sure that everyone who invested a dollar knew that dollar was going to the expansion of the company, expansion of the cannabis growing side, so that we could be in a strong position as we move forward. And lastly, we have our R&D initiative that's out there with McGill. I did want to also tell you, if you didn't have a chance, today we announced Dr. Karar has joined us. She's a PhD postdoc from McGill University, was working on her research and development. We are so lucky with the advice and help of McGill and Dr. Karar that she was allowed to come join us. She has her background in plant genetics and plant breeding. Please go and take a look at that. Our real commitment is getting our process, the science side of our business, our repeatability of our growing, using the science side to get that in place. So our R&D, both internally and externally, is continuing to build out. Next slide, please. Our market, here's our market reception. This is how the market sort of responded to us here. And you can see it's been very, very positive and very consistent for us. Next slide. A little bit about the executive team here. We talked about myself. We talked about Bill Robinson. Dave Cross is our chief financial officer of the company. Has been running public practice as an accountant for many, many years, and he's the CFO of numerous companies. Extremely good background, and the person who helps me every single day, making sure that we maintain our compliancy right across the regulation side of the business and from the public market side of the business. Belinda Sable has joined us several months ago. She leads all of our quality assurance as our business and our regulatory compliance. She is a fully qualified quality assurance person, or QAP, at one point for a licensed producer. She's also put in place and based in dealing with Health Canada on the regulation side of the business and how to manage the standard operating procedures and the practices of the facility. And she's extremely well versed in hemp. And hemp is going to be a big talking point across this cannabis space as we move forward. And then Marla Ritchie is our corporate secretary. And again, Simarjeet Karar joined us. Next slide, please. We really put a real strong team together here from the board of directors to help me. I know cannabis, I know the regulations, but I needed someone to support me on the public side and really be those people that I could lean on that have got tremendous amount of experience in the public market space, accounting space, and in the cannabis space. Hank Van Alphen, personal friend now of mine as we've got to know each other, has been in the resource space for many years. He's raised and been involved in transactions well over $1 billion in the mining sector, and is that person I can reach out to every single day to get a good understanding about how to make the next choices, how to continue to only execute our strategy and not get distracted. Tony Drescher does a lot of our work in advising the board advice on our accounting strategies as we move out into different markets. He's there to help us out. Dr. George Benet was the former lead of cardiology in Westminster, British Columbia. He now is the director of the fibrillation clinic at Royal Columbian Hospital, and someone who gives us a perspective of always making sure that our product is being grown, whether for retail use or for medicinal use, that it's always grown to a matter where people will get the same result or feeling or experience every single time. He drives that into our company every single day. And last but not least, Chris Bechtel was with Supreme Pharmaceuticals several years ago. He has joined us, and also he is the CEO and president of CERNA, which is a climate control technology used in the cannabis space. So a really well-rounded team. Next slide, please. And lastly, this is where our market position is here right now, and the outstanding shares. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Alan.
Hey, George, thank you so much for sharing all that detail. I know for a lot of people on the call, that was probably the first time to hear from you directly, as well as to learn about this. And I have just a few questions before I ask them. I want to remind everybody that you can type your questions in. We already have a few building in the queue, and if you'll just add to those, we'll get them addressed momentarily. And I guess my first question for you, George, is on the Orbital Gardens technology. How scalable do you think this is, and do you have any sort of manufacturing concerns?
Great question. Manufacturing concern, I'll take the latter question first. We actually manufacture on our own. We have our own manufacturing facility of the gardens itself. It's in Edmonton, Alberta. We are in full control of our full BOM. We manufacture everything to the requirements for seismic issues. So on the manufacturing side, we have no issues there. We fully control that. Scalable. Our own facility in Edmonton, the Alberta Green Biotech, will have 336 gardens in them. So our control system that manages a lot is fully scalable to thousands of units in any one particular building. But I think our sweet spot would start at about 180 to 120 gardens, and then scale up to 500, 1,000 or more gardens in a single facility.
I guess just to clarify slightly, how many of these can you make is really what I was asking.
Oh, okay. Our limitation is just on how many hours, but right now we have in the queue 526 gardens in the build queue, and we'll have all of those done by early July. Okay, and then my next question is, you talked a lot about how you're working with the Indigenous nations to deploy some of the technologies and all that, but are you able to deploy the rotational gardens into other LPs? Absolutely. I think our gardening technology is our gardening technology, and if an LP would like to partner with us, we'd be more than happy to work with them. We believe that this gardening strategy is going to be a game changer, and we look for all those opportunities we can discuss with other LPs should they want the garden, and we'll talk about how we can partner together to have them have the success of the garden also.
And then you guys have done a lot of consulting in the industry. Who's your, in the LP space, or LP applicant space, who's your target client really? Is it larger ones, smaller ones? Is there any way you can characterize who it is that you work best with?
Yeah, well, I would have to suggest that we would never usually look at a client unless they're going to be 25,000 square feet or so or bigger. When we take a look at just the costs of operating a facility, we know that as you get smaller, there's some more challenges that come into play about trying to have enough revenues to sort of drive and self-fund your company. So I would say a company at 25,000 square feet looking to expand. Most of our clients are committed to somewhere in the area of 25 to 100,000 or more square feet, where we can maximize the use of the garden with them.
Okay, well, we have a lot of questions. I have some more. I'll save them or see if they get covered. I'm just going to take these kind of in the order they came up. And the first one, where did it go? Here we go. How many crop cycles have you grown now with the orbital gardens, and what have the yields been like for each of those harvests on a per square foot basis?
Yeah, so the gardens we've been modifying the gardens and growing in them for about 18 months. We have people, friends that have their personal ACMPR or MMARs that are using the gardens for growing. Our current yield cycle per grow is about 8 pounds to 9 pounds out of those gardens currently right now in an 8-week cycle. We are getting 6 cycles in, so you can start doing the math there. But from that perspective, there are other people out there using rotational gardens that we went and taken a look at. But we believe the way that we've got it tuned, that we can get 6 cycles out of it, 8 pounds over an 8-week cycle.
And you explained, you know, the productivity very clearly, but we have a question about the price, and it kind of gets to a question I had in terms of the return on investment for anybody deploying the technology. So how much do the orbital gardens cost?
Well, you know what, we sell them integrated into the facility with the full control system. But if we were to sort of how we characterize the return on investment is that usually in 1 to 1.5 grow cycles, you'd get paid back on them. So imagine a garden, which when I say the garden, it's also the ancillary control systems that are in place and all the connections and hookups to it to make it run and operate by itself. Think in the terms of about $15,000 to $17,500 per garden.
Okay, so that's a pretty quick payback. Another question that came in is not your relative Bill Robinson a full-time employee, or is he a consultant?
No, all the people that we showed here are full-time employees with us, and he works full-time. He's based out of Edmonton and is traveling frequently, but a full-time employee for sure.
Okay, and then do you have any technology for extraction that you can talk about right now?
We're looking at extraction right now. So we kind of as a company call it the whole processing of the plant material, because sometimes you may want to look at the plant and do a sort of a fresh extraction to get some of the terpene values out. But in that whole process, you have decarboxylation, you have purification and filtration. We are looking at that very carefully right now. I have someone who spends about 40% of their time is just reviewing all the technologies on a worldwide basis, not what's available here in North America. We'll be very excited to talk about what we're going to do on the processing side of the business in a few months as we figure out very, very clearly, first of all, what the output product's going to be from that processing side to make sure that you buy the right equipment to get you to a finished product. So we are looking at it, and someone's been following this since November in designing out our strategy towards processing.
Yeah, I want to interject one of my questions because you guys have obviously built a lot of this in-house, but can you just shed a little bit of light on your process of technology acquisition? Is it all developed internally, or it sounds like you're also looking to third parties?
Yeah, so if you take a look at the dryer, that's a company out of Europe. We want to partner with them. We add some of our own intellectual property that we have that we know that we need to put into that relative to the output of the cannabis product that we're looking for. But we do partner up with other companies that we become their manufacturer's representative, and we're always scouring the earth, finding different and unique ways to add product lines to the company's portfolio.
Got it. And then another question from someone in the audience is, Indigenous nations still need a license to cultivate and sell cannabis, right? What RQB offers is a simplified and fast-track approach. Is this accurate?
Yeah, well, the fast tracking approach is a lot of that work we do with the Navigator program that Health Canada put in place, largely at the request of us. I've been out there talking to many of the ministers and also the health ministers say, let's find a way to move their application through as quickly as possible. So yes, they have to have a license to cultivate. This is a federal requirement. Although when they build the facility on their reserve land, they don't have municipal oversight relative to the building code, so we can move very, very quickly through the construction phase. Although we build the buildings to meet all of the construction requirements and codes of the building, we have a very quick way to move through the application process and then get the building built on reserve land very fast.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but to date, there have been no First Nations LPs, right?
No, there's none that have got a license to cultivate yet. We understand there's a building closer to being finished out in Ontario, but we haven't heard anything more from that. I can tell you through the Navigator program, 2 of my clients are in that program, and I haven't heard of anyone else in the program. So I know that the program's there, but First Nations have made investments into non-First Nations based licensed producers, but I think our clients that are coming through the process will be the ones where they're owned primarily by the First Nation, what we call own source revenue, at least 51-49% to the nation.
Yeah, I'm familiar with a few LPs that have strategic partnerships, but thanks for verifying that. The next question coming in from the audience is your company more focused on the services side or the production side? And how much are the services bringing in compared to current production? Well, we know that they're bringing in more because there's no current production, but can you talk about more the outlook there?
Yeah, we've had lots of filings, so you can go and see a lot of stuff that's out on CDAR or other places. But we see for the year 2018-2019 on the management services side, we see around a $15 million revenue stream there. But that's all in advance of getting the cannabis production facilities with their license to sell and dispense. But once we get up to 11,000 kilograms, even that at a reasonable $5 per gram on a wholesale basis, that's going to be a $55 million business each and every single year without adding any other value to that product itself. So we see near term the management services side being a critical part of the build out of the cannabis space in Canada and beyond. Our website's rqbglobal.com for a reason. But yeah, we would see that in the near term, we're going to have more revenues on the management services side, but quickly shifting where a majority of our revenue will be coming from the cannabis production and processing side.
Got it. We have a questioner wondering if it's possible to visit the Burnaby facility.
It always is. We're open for business for sure. So anytime that you want to come out, please reach out to Matthew McDonald. His name is right there in front of the slide. He'll do all of our coordination of that, and we'll make sure that there's people in the facility to walk you through. It takes about an hour and a half to kind of go through everything that we have going on there, but you're always welcome to come out to the demonstration facility for sure.
And I'm going to combine a question I had with one coming in from the audience. And my question was really if you could address the international plans that you have. And the question that came in kind of dovetails is, are you going to sell the orbital gardens into the United States?
No, we won't sell orbital gardens into the U.S. at all. There is a patent there held by another company on orbital gardens. Whereas in Canada, we have 3 other producers, so we wouldn't ever take the technology down in there. But on more of a larger playing field, we are already hosting conversations with groups that would love to take our whole building, not the garden, take our whole building design with the drying technologies, the processing areas, the gardens, take the whole building design, pick it up and drop it in that country as a turnkey solution for them, complete with security measures and SOPs. That's what people are looking for on the international basis. It's just not the gardens, but more largely the perspective of what we can do in just bringing something that is fine-tuned to grow repeatably, no matter where we put that building.
And should we expect that to happen in the next, say, 2 years?
I would think so for sure. Those discussions, they're very preliminary, but we're having lots of people reach out to us, even in the past week, that are saying, we love what you're doing, we love your design, we love your 4-pillar approach. Can you bring this to us? Can you help us out? So I would say the answer is yes, although right now we're just in early discussion phases currently.
Fair enough. Another question that came in earlier to me, and I see a similar question in the queue. Can you talk about how the partnerships with Indigenous nations work in terms of equity or revenue sharing? And also, you talked about the 15 million over the next couple of years in the services and a larger amount from cannabis production, but what about that part of your business? Will that be even larger?
Yeah, that's really great they understand that. So the question really needs to be framed and put back that today, let's take it out of the cannabis space. Across Indigenous lands in Canada, there are lots of joint venture structures that are in place where at the limited partnership level of or organization or legal structure, it would show that the nation is 51-49. So if we then back that out and say, okay, let's take an example up into the northern part of Alberta up here in Canada, where we have oil sands production. There are lots of associations with Indigenous people up there where the LP, the limited partnership, is 51-49. But as you come down through the design of that legal structure or legal entity that we put together, below that is a management services contract that allows a player like a very large offshore oil and gas company to come in, operate, take off or peel off the revenues that needed for their investments, and then the profits go back through that GP-LP arrangement. So from our perspective, we're applying those exact same rules to the game of our engagements with Indigenous people. These are structures that have been around for a long time. So what that might look like is, in some cases, we take a percentage or an equity position in the company. And then the next position we might do is do a streaming agreement where we'll provide the capital for them. And then at that point, what happens is we can go and take a stream of 20 or 30%, depending on how that plan is all derived and how it's all worked out. And then from there, we have a guaranteed stream of cannabis coming, while at the same time in the early years, helping them operate the facility. But one of the things that we've been very careful to do in all of discussions with our Indigenous partners and new partners that we're talking to, we make sure there's an exit strategy for everyone. So we have kind of defined it as the boot: build, own, operate, transfer. So we always put agreements into place that allows the Indigenous community we can transfer the full asset back to them with some exit strategy on our side where we get compensated accordingly.
And how many of these partnerships do you think you could manage?
Currently, we believe around 12 is where our modeling sits right now. Remembering I've built that management side of the business, the consulting services side with Benel, others that we don't talk about that are on our team that handle the security side of the business, the patient's genetic side. We have a whole team that can come in, help audit, help manage. We've hired now in many of our applications. We've been the recruiter for many of the key positions in the roles. So we do and have built a strong team that's coming up and in place. So we believe about 12 of them will be whereabouts we'd want to maximize our opportunity at. Okay.
And then somebody's asking about the patents, and I understand from previous discussions with you that you didn't invent this, and you said earlier it's old technology, but I know that you've made a lot of proprietary improvements. What is your intellectual property protection there?
Well, I come from an old school that says that you build critical mass and then you apply for all your intellectual property positions, right? Rather than going to throw them out to the world. Because once you throw them out to the world and you make those declarations, now people can work around it to kind of put the way that does it. But I'll tell you specifically where we've made our investments. We've made the investments into the control system for sure. We've made investments into making sure that the gardens are seismically approved. So wherever we put them, they meet seismic requirements. We've made improvements to how the gardens are fed, and we've made improvements to how the trays are watered and how the trays are mounted in and out of the gardens. So those are the areas that we've worked on. We have not applied for any IP yet. We're going to wait till we get some critical mass, which will be in about another 6 to 12 months, and then we'll be declaring what our IP is.
And I forget, do you pay royalties on a per unit basis to the company in Australia, or how's that relationship?
Nope, we do not. We've made our changes to the gardens where there is no royalty payments at all, and we're basically on our own right now.
Okay, and then a really good question from the audience about distribution. You mentioned earlier, it sounds like you'll be wholesaling out of your 2 facilities at present. Is this indeed the case, and have you had discussions yet on how you're going to actually move the product?
Well, first and foremost, with Bill's Rolodex of all of the other presidents and CEOs of gaming or liquor commissions, we know that we can move our product when we're ready to do that. But let's talk a little bit more broader. Wholesaling it or putting it out to the retail space or selling directly to a patient on the medicinal side is there. But we're very involved in building out the retail space right now. We're already looking at properties in different provinces. We are working with our partners, especially the Indigenous partners, to help them with strategies on the retail build out. So although today we talked about sort of the production to the wholesale level, there is a whole movement in the company that we're working on the retail side as we speak today.
That's exciting. I think we're running out of time here, and I had just one more question I wanted to ask you that came in from somebody earlier, which is I don't think you have any analyst coverage right now. Is that something that's likely to change in the near term?
Yeah, that's going to happen very quickly. We've had commitments from Haywood and others that they're stepping up to do analyst coverage. So we believe that in the next 30 days, you'll start to see some very good traction and some commitments from analysts on what we're up to.
Great. So you covered a lot today. I still want to let you get in a last word. Before I do that, though, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And if when you summarize, George, if you could let us know, ways to get in touch. I see there's some information on the screen right now about how to get in touch with Matthew, but if there's anything else you want to share, and also if there's any important dates ahead, I know on my own that you'll be filing your quarterly financials at the end of this month, but anything else that people should be looking out for in the near term?
Yeah, like we have our OTC listing. We're going to be moving up to the QX. Our Form 211 is just in for consideration. So for those in the US, we'll be continuing to offer ways that you can learn more about RavenQuest through the OTC websites. Other than that, I think you should just look forward to some new announcements that we've got coming out here in the very near term, just finalizing those things up. I think it's going to be a very exciting quarter for us as we start talking more about retail, more of our partnerships that we have that are being honed and solidified right now. Just take a look for those exciting things that are coming up and stay tuned because lots of great things will be in play over the next 90 days.
Okay, well, once again, thank you so much for telling us about the RavenQuest story. I know our audience very happy to have this information. And for those who are attending, we will be sending out a recording. So in case you missed anything or would like to have it, we'll get that. And George, we look forward to updates in the near future. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Alan.